Hollingsworth from Charlotte Mecklenburg County Attorney. We also have with us Dr. Kalpana Shanmugam. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist with Novant Health. Thank you all for taking our time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. We have a couple of others to thank. Netrocon Digital is our event sponsor for the day. Netrocon Digital is a full-service digital marketing and technology services firm headquartered in Charlotte. If you're looking for IT jobs in Charlotte and NC State, do not forget to check out the sponsor table. If you're an owner of or a VC-backed startup looking to grow, Netrocon Digital is your go-to marketing partner. Also, our co-sponsor is Sitara, authentic Indian restaurant. Located on North Tryon Street, Sitara is a warm and welcoming restaurant that brings you a variety of dishes from different regions of India. The snacks and teas that you're enjoying have been sponsored by Sitara. We started out as a small group of women helping women, and now we've grown to be Shakthi. Setting up a platform for us to meet is a woman whose passion and purpose is to help others. She believes that empowering women would lead to more growth. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you founder and director of Shakthi Corporation, Nidhya Gaspar. I'd like to request Nidhya to speak a few words and talk to us about Shakthi.
Thank you, Priya. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have each of you here this evening. I would like to request the board members of Shakthi join me here. So you guessed it. So these are the women behind the scenes working and worked all year to bring Shakthi where it is now today. I'm really proud to be here standing with my leadership team and board members and volunteers of Shakthi Corporation. This initiative started a year ago. That time I didn't know most of the women standing here. There's only one thing that we all had in common. It is the initiative to help. Women helping women. That's what brought all of us together. And we learned it the hard way. Every struggle we went through made us stronger. Whatever we learned, we wanted to pass it on to another woman who is starting a life journey. And that's where we are here. The mission of Shakthi is to help, support, and empower women to shape their own future. I would like to share some of our accomplishments the past year. With Shakthi, we always encourage a healthy lifestyle, and we offer weekly yoga sessions for women. We also have online yoga practice every day at 6 o'clock. We do a Skype video. If anybody would like to join, feel free to ping me anytime. We promote civic engagement of women. We also connect people with support groups for special need kids, holistic health, and other common interests. We help with travel companion assistance for parents traveling to and from India. We have a dedicated mentor team who provide career advice, basic computer training, QA training, support, all offered for free. We do help with small business promotion and women entrepreneurship. We encourage women participation in leadership, management, and technology. We have monthly and weekly events in Facebook to showcase talents of our members. And I'm really proud to say we have 600 Facebook members and we have 750 members part of Shakthi Corporation. There are lots of organizations offering help and support to women abroad. But your next door neighbor may be needing help, maybe in depression or pain. So let's be compassionate, help, and support the women we see, talk, and work with. We never know what her struggle is. We are Shakthi. Please repeat after me. We are powerful.
We are powerful.
We are Shakthi.
We are Shakti.
Thank you.
Hello all. Today is a wonderful day today after all the rainy days. So it is a sunny and beautiful bright day today where we have our first event of Shakthi Corporation. So I feel so proud and blessed to invite all our speakers tonight. Thank you for coming for us. And I would like to first call upon Detective Mr. Tony Reno and Detective Mr. Amy Baswell from CMPD, the Department of CMPD, and he's from Crimes Against Children or Special Victims Division. Please provide your session. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Detective. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Should I do something?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I'm Detective Baswell. I work with the Crimes Against Children's unit at CMPD. We have a separate unit that it's within the Special Victims Division, but we investigate any physical abuse or sexual abuse of children under the age of 15, or 15 and under. Better. We have certain things that we do have to respond to in that category of crime. So there's 3 reasons why we get involved. It's usually when the incident occurs within 72 hours. If the crime involves someone that lives in the home currently, and or if it's a stranger involved situation, like at something that happens with a kid at a bus stop or something like that. We do, I would say, the majority of our cases revolve around sexual abuse, but we do also investigate physical abuse. And I think it's going to be easier for us to answer questions maybe at the end rather than try to explain ahead of time what we do, so we're open to any questions that you have. My partner's going to explain a little bit more about the difference between the different types of abuse, though, physical abuse.
I'm Detective Reno. So we deal with, there's misdemeanor child abuse and felony child abuse. When we respond to physical abuse calls for service, it tends to either be, things that involve like bruises or, something more serious, like in the hospital if a child has a broken bone or even a burn. We have to respond to make sure that, we also respond with DSS, make sure that we find out what exactly is going on, do an investigation. We conduct an investigation and DSS conducts a separate investigation. We tend to focus more on the criminal aspect, see if there's any kind of criminal wrongdoing, if it was intentional, if it, we usually deal with crimes that leave lasting injury, like I mentioned, like, any kind of cuts or really bad bruising, particularly on the face or anywhere where you wouldn't tend to find bruising related to discipline. We've dealt with, kids with broken bones, kids with burns, things like that. So when we tend to get calls either from an officer that's on scene that, got a 911 call, or we get calls from DSS and we have to respond out to the scene with them, and then we conduct an investigation. Like Detective Baswell said, if it deals with child sex abuse, if it's within 72 hours, or if the perpetrator lives in the home, that's when we tend to respond. But if the child's at the hospital with something more serious than just a bruise, we tend to respond out there as well for that. So we've got a list of questions. I guess one of the questions is, when does it become abuse rather than discipline? I would say anything that leaves a lasting injury. And we get cases where there's bruises. Now, bruises on the face, that tends to be something that's not just discipline. So if someone's hitting their child and it's in a manner where it's not just discipline, like they're angry and they want to cause physical harm to that child, that's when it tends to become child abuse. So the protocol when 911 is called, basically, someone calls 911, the dispatcher will then document it in our what's called the CAD system, and then they dispatch officers to the scene to conduct an initial investigation. And the information that the officers gather at that point, they'll determine whether a detective needs to respond. Because detectives work for specialized units that focus on particular crimes, and they're more experienced and knowledgeable in those kinds of crimes. So those detectives would respond to the scene and deal with it the way they deal with it. And then a report will be made in our reporting system, documenting thoroughly everything that happens. If a detective gets involved, the report will then be assigned to that detective, and the detective will do follow-up, interviewing witnesses, taking out warrants on someone if they've determined probable cause for a crime that was committed. I see a question about rights as a parent. I guess I would say more about your responsibilities as a parent. We have issues sometimes where parents get mad at their kid, and they kick them out of the house and they don't let them back in. As your parent, you're responsible for that child, so you can't just kick your kid out onto the street and expect them to just figure out things on their own. If they're under 18, you're responsible for them. You're responsible for clothing them, feeding them, giving them shelter, all those basic responsibilities as a parent. Making sure that if your child is injured, if your child reports to you or discloses to you information about being abused by someone, it's your responsibility to seek medical attention. It's your responsibility to report that to the authorities, either DSS, police, or both. Because there is what's called neglect. So if your child is injured, like we had a case recently where a child was burned by a hot pot of oil fell on her and burned her leg. And the mom didn't abuse the child. She didn't pour the oil on the child. But when the child went to the mom and told her, hey, I've got this really bad burn on my leg, mom didn't seek out medical attention. And it was a nasty burn. It was going to get infected, and the child was going to get ill, or, because you can technically die from infection if you don't get it treated. And mom failed to seek out treatment. So we charged her for neglect. So basically, you need to seek out medical attention if you have someone, a child that's injured or is ill. If you have a baby, making sure that you're going and doing your follow-up appointments. The doctor is telling you need to bring your baby to the hospital for, just a basic checkup, just to make sure your baby's healthy. Be honest with medical officials, or tell them if you suspect there's something wrong with your child, let them know, because they'll document that, and that could help you later on in case there's ever a police investigation. Because we'll get medical records and things like that. I guess I would also add, make sure if your child is of the appropriate age, make sure you're talking to them about, their bodies, and making sure they understand what's right and what's wrong. Make sure they understand that, what are good touches and what are bad touches. Nobody should be touching their private areas. If you're a parent and you're change your child's diaper and you need to wipe them or whatever you need to do, that's appropriate touching. But if your child tells you that, say their uncles live in the house and the uncle's touching them and they don't have any of those responsibilities for caring for the child in that way, you need to look into that, and you need to report it if you suspect that there's some kind of, abuse going on.
I see another question here about at what point does decide or make the decision to involve Child Protective Services or the DV unit or something like that. So based on any case, if a 911, like he explained, a 911 call is put in and an officer responds if they've determined that a crime occurred in the presence of a child or if the crime actually involved a child, then it is an automatic referral that they have to do in the report that notifies Child Protective Services about it. So then once they get the referral, they'll explain the process, but they have the option of screening it in or screening it out based on their protocol. So pretty much we're mandated, if anything involves a child, to notify CPS about that. So it might be a good time to pass it off to them. Like I said, we can take questions more specific afterwards.
Good evening. As the detectives indicated, there's a difference between DSS and law enforcement. Law enforcement will do an investigation. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. And DSS will do a separate investigation. Law enforcement's investigation is mainly focused on criminal. And what that means is that if they find that there's evidence and you go to court, there is a possibility of you going to jail. DSS is a civil proceeding, which is different, which means that unless something odd happens, there's not that possibility that you will go to jail. And DSS has different requirements because we are civil and different protocols. So basically, when DSS gets involved, we first have to start with DSS being a government agency. And basically what that means is people that live in the United States that are in this country have rights. And one of the main rights that we look at is that people have a Fourth Amendment right to their life, liberty, and property. And part of what that means is that your children are your property and you have a right to raise your children. The United States Supreme Court has said that over in cases is that parents have a fundamental right and a constitutional right to raise their children the way that they see fit. But what the United States Supreme Court has also said is that that right is limited because you automatically assume that parents are going to act in the best interest of their children. They're going to do right by their children. But the court has said that that right is limited when parents act in a way that is inconsistent with that right to raise their children. And when they do that, that allows for the government, i.e. DSS, to come in and investigate. So that's basically what we have to do is we do this balancing act. We have to balance that parent's right to raise their children along with the government's right to protect children because there are laws that say that the government has to protect our children. And so when DSS is called, we do that balancing act. And the North Carolina legislature has done that, and they passed a law and they passed laws. And in North Carolina, there is a whole section of laws that's devoted to juvenile court DSS and what DSS can do, what DSS can't do. And that's in the state laws are in line with the federal laws. So you have the federal piece, and then you have the state piece, and then you have policies that come in that DSS has to operate within. And so those are the things that DSS uses as a guide to make that determination as to whether or not we should be involved. So what you have to look at is whether or not that parent is doing something, and Ms. Hooper is going to talk to you about what that looks like, and then I'll come back and talk about those legal requirements. But as they indicated, in North Carolina, there is a law that says that it's everybody's responsibility to report child abuse. It's your responsibility. We all have a duty to report child abuse. That's by statute. And so we have some information that tells you the number to call in terms of what that looks like. You can make a report orally, you can make a report in writing, you can fax, you can do it anonymously. It's however you choose to do that report, you can do that. And basically there is a law that also says that if you see somebody injuring a child and you don't report it, that could be a crime and the police could get involved. And so we look at all of that. So that's one of the consequences of failing to make a report. And I'll let Ms. Hooper talk about the information in her role.
My name's Betty Hooper. I'm a supervisor over our intake and after hours. I always, when I do presentations, I always like to let folks know that we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays. Anybody can make a report, and we always like to get the names of the folks so we can call them back if we need to get any other information, but you can call anonymously too. Or, as Ms. Hollingsworth said, you can walk in, you can send us a letter, anything. When I started investigations as a social worker, we had 8 investigators. Now we have about 80. So that shows you how there's been an increase.
Can you please move the mic closer?
I'm sorry. When I started as investigator, we had I was one of 8 social workers. Now we have about 80. So that tells you how there's been an increase in abuse and neglect. We also, when I was saying about people calling in and giving us reports, we receive about 1,500 reports of abuse and neglect a month. Out of that, we accept for investigation around 800. Sometimes people think that if I just call in a report, we're going to accept it for investigation, but it has to meet certain guidelines. Because again, Ms. Hollingsworth said that parents have the right to raise their children the way they want to. Here. That's okay. So I talked about you can call in or you can remain anonymous. We keep your information confidential. If you're calling in on your neighbor, we cannot we go out to the home and talk to mom or dad and they say, well, I know, Susie next door is the one that called in this report. We cannot tell them who called in the report. It's against the law for us to do that. What I always used to say is it doesn't matter who called in. What matters is if it's true, and if it's true, what can we do to help you? So we do have some pamphlets and everything over here with the names of our agency and the numbers to call. So when somebody calls, what we do is try to get as much demographic information as possible. Names, numbers, addresses. A lot of folks don't have that. We can go on just a phone number. Sometimes somebody will see a child alone in a car and they'll get a DMV tag. We have access to DMV, so we'll get the tag number and we'll find the family that way. We investigate cases of abuse, sex abuse, and neglect. And when we're talking about neglect, we're talking about children that aren't fed or clothed appropriately for the weather. We're talking about children that are inappropriately disciplined, which is different from physical abuse. When we're looking at physical abuse, we're looking at injuries to sometimes the vital organs, the head. With inappropriate discipline, we're talking about children that may have marks on their legs. We also investigate cases where there's substance abuse that is affecting the care of the children. And then we investigate emotional abuse. Parents sometimes can be very cruel to their children. And just like today, I always like to give examples. We had a parent that was saying some very hurtful things to a child, and it caused the child to want to commit suicide. So we investigate things like that. We also investigate sex abuse as well as human trafficking, which is an increase in Mecklenburg County. We used to investigate daycares, but we no longer do that. We investigate group homes and facilities where children are. So whenever we get a referral and someone gets all the information, the demographic information, and then they're going to get what your worries are, then I'm going to look at the referral and see if we're going to accept it for investigation. If it's a case where, we'll say a 3-year-old is home alone, we're going to go out there immediately. If it's a case of sex abuse where the alleged suspect is in the home with the child, we're going to go out there immediately. If it's a case where a child may have, we'll say an 8-year-old that may have a mark on their leg due to being beat with a belt, we have to go out within 24 hours. It can be sooner than 24 hours, but it can be no longer than 24 hours. You know, a lot of times when I talk to people, they say, well, are you saying I can't physically discipline my children? We're not saying that, but if you use anything, you can't leave a mark, and it can't be where there is, you know, a vital organ. We always say it's best to, you know, look at the buttocks if you're going to use any kind of physical discipline. And then you also have to look at the age of the child. I mean, a teenager, that's not going to be very effective. We also get cases where we can respond within 72 hours. If there is like drug dealing in the home and the child is in there and is aware of that, or if there's a supervision issue but it's not anything that is imminent, then we have up to 72 hours to respond to those cases. When we get a physical abuse or sex abuse case, we can go out and see the child at the school without the parent's permission. That's how it used to be up until about 10 years ago. At that time, North Carolina changed its laws and said social workers can go out in two different ways. One is called forensic, where they can go to the school, talk to the child without the parent's permission. And those are the cases of sex abuse and physical abuse. If it's a neglect case, say it's children aren't being fed or mom or dad's using drugs and it's affecting the children, we were going to call the parents and say, can we come out there and talk to you about some concerns somebody called in? And what we found is that's actually been very helpful. I can remember one time where we were out there and we interviewed the children in front of the parents, because that's, you know, what the law says we can do. And the mom was saying, oh, I don't use drugs. And all of a sudden this little 7-year-old goes, well, Mama, you know you do use drugs because they're over here. So, you know, that's very helpful. And what we call that is a family assessment, where we're wanting to be involved with the families, and we don't want to be the bad guys. One thing is when we go out there as an investigator, after we gather all the information from the parents and see all the children in the home and talk to collaterals, we can rather do one of the three things. We can rather close our case because there's no concerns, or we can work with the family on the issues. And lastly, and it's only if the children are in imminent danger do we look at removal. So I always want to really stress that, because I think folks see stuff on TV and think we just automatically go in there and remove children. We have to know that they're an imminent risk. Let me see, what else? And I'm going to hand this back to Ms. Hollingsworth.
In order for DSS to be involved, the law requires like special relationships. Like the police, for instance, they can get involved in any case. It doesn't matter what the relationship is between the victim and the alleged perpetrator. For DSS, it does matter. And what the statute says is that there has to be a special relationship with the child and the person that's alleged to have harmed that child. And so what the statute says is that in order for DSS to be involved, you have to have a child, which is defined in statute as a juvenile who's under the age of 18 or who's not been enrolled in the armed services. You have to have a parent of that child, it's a biological parent. And believe it or not, in the juvenile code, parent is not defined anywhere, which is interesting. But you also, if that person is a custodian of a child, that means that person has legal custody, that person has gone to court and gotten a court order, we can get involved. We can also get involved if that person has guardianship of a child. And that is a special relationship that's defined by the statute also, and it's given by the court. And it's like you have the right to make those decisions. It's a legal right to make decisions for that particular child. We can also get involved if that person is identified as a caretaker of a child. And caretaker, that definition has changed over time. And that means that someone that the parent has given the responsibility of caring for that particular child, making decisions for that child. It's an adult that lives in the home with the child. Now, if it's like a babysitter who's coming over, DSS is not going to be involved. For those types of cases, we will refer those cases to law enforcement. Just like law enforcement will refer cases to the department, we will also refer cases to law enforcement. And a lot of times we do try to work hand in hand. because we know that it is an invasion when people come in. Additionally, the other thing that DSS looks at is there are 3 types of cases that we look at. Ms. Hooper alluded to some of those types of cases earlier, but in law they're defined very particular. We can only look at if a child has been abused, and she talked about that earlier, the human trafficking. Now with human trafficking, there has been a change. If it's anybody that's been alleged to have trafficked a particular child, DSS can get involved. It doesn't matter what that relationship is. And that's the only special caveat in the law now. And that was changed earlier this year. The other thing is that if a child is neglected, if there are allegations of neglect, DSS can get involved. And neglect is very particular because what the law says is that we don't have to wait until a parent harms a child. If we think that there is a risk of harm to that particular child, we can still get involved. We don't have to wait for the child to be burned. We can, we don't have to wait for that child to be caught up in the middle of a domestic violence incident. We can go out and still get involved. Neglect also means that, if you're not taking your child to school and that child is school age, that's neglect because you're depriving that child of an opportunity to grow and flourish. If your child needs speech therapy and you're not, and you have the ability to go and take that child to speech therapy, that's also neglect. As the officer and Ms. Hooper indicated, if you're not getting your child medical care, if you're not providing appropriate supervision, if you just take your child and drop your child off with the neighbor and you don't tell the neighbor, in the case of emergency, you can do this, I'm going to be here, here's how to contact me. That's not providing proper care, supervision, and discipline for your child. That can also be considered neglect. Then there's also this category of dependency. Dependency means that the child doesn't have a parent or that the child has a parent who's unable and or unwilling to care for the child, and that parent is not willing to make an appropriate child care arrangement for that particular child. So in those 3 instances, as it relates to a child, the department can become involved. And I guess, I don't know who wants to do next. And we'll answer questions later.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is really beneficial for all of us. Yeah.
I do want to say something since I want to contribute to the conversation. I think where we get involved as physicians is, I'm a mandated reporter, so anybody that's involved in child care, any physician, a daycare provider, anybody is in the position of taking care of a child in any way, shape, or form, we are mandated reporters. So if a child tells me that, any information that makes me concerned that the child is being harmed or neglected, my role is not to investigate. If I have enough suspicion that the child is in danger, I am mandated to call DSS. For example, I had a child, the child was there for a session and the mother was heavily intoxicated. So I knew that the child was not going to be safe going home with the mother. And at that point, we had to call the law enforcement because we told her that she cannot drive the child, but she refused to listen. So we called law enforcement. Recently, I had another child where it was a 4-year-old, and she tells me there's a gun in the house, there's a loaded gun, the grandfather refuses to put it in the safe. So I told the mother that they have to remove the gun because this is a child and they shouldn't have access to firearm, especially a loaded firearm. And they said, this is my house, this is my rule, you won't tell me where I put my gun. And I had to call DSS and they actually took the case. So some of us are mandated reporters, and sometimes parents get angry when I tell my parents sometimes that I am going to call DSS. Sometimes I do it anonymously based on how comfortable I feel. But like they said, we all have a responsibility to inform when we think a child is in danger, or an adult too. And where again we get involved is when there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, when they take the case and they have reason to believe that the child's health is, is affected. So we come back, we sometimes do screening. Many of these children suffer from severe anxiety, post-traumatic stress, So we do psychiatric assessment to see what kind of care they need. And, you know, we work as a team.
I'll say one more thing because you gave me an example of a case that I guess recently happened in Florida. I think that brought some concern. I don't know the circumstances around that, but based on what I heard, I can kind of try and address any questions. So apparently there was a case in Florida where a family took their children, twins maybe, to the hospital with some swelling. And once the doctor started doing testing, they found that there was additional injuries, possibly broken bones or something like that. That can be pretty common. Usually when a child of a certain age comes in, they automatically do what's called a skeletal exam, just to make sure there aren't any other injuries. And a lot of times they will find that there are, and that they're previous, so it leads them to believe that it happened at a different time, and it's concerning. So at that point, they'll talk to the parents and address the injuries and see if they have a story for them, and make a determination as to whether or not those injuries are considered to be accidental or non-accidental. And so if they're considered to be non-accidental, that's when the concern comes in, and like she said, they're mandated reporters to inform DSS and detectives that there are injuries that don't add up and if they need to be investigated. So the situation in Florida where the parents, it sounds like, just declined any further medical care and took the kids home, the hospital staff would have had to contact DSS and detectives based on their findings, and that's probably why social services went out to the house and did what they did. So, not knowing a lot about that circumstance, that's what I can tell you at least would happen here. I'm not sure if the protocol is different in Florida or not, but probably it's pretty similar.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was one incident which was troubling us to think of what went wrong with the parents. Is it a problem with the parents, or is it something that we are missing? Whether we are not aware of any of the US laws or anything. So that is what triggered us to come up with a awareness event like this. Thank you so much again. Now the floor is open for Q&A. So I would like to invite Victoria from CMPD, Domestic Violence Unit, and Dr. Kalpana Shanmugam from Novant, Health, Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Thank you so much. So Maria will be facilitating the Q&A session. Thank you.
Hope you are ready for your questions, right? Okay, first of all, we thank you all again, because why we are saying thank you again, because it's a Friday, right? All are having a party time and they are around, but you are all sitting here for us, because we don't know many things, because we are from a different land and different culture and different rules and regulations and different habits, right? So, thank you for bridging us to this country, and thank you for your time too. And so just a note for you, first we are going to ask our questions to CMPD and our child protection, both the teams first, because they have to leave. And after that, our Dr. Kalpana will be there with us for some more time, so you can save your questions for her later. Okay, so we'll start with the CMPD questions first. And you have the papers too, if you want, you can write it.
I have a general question. As she was saying, we don't know about the laws. Is there any way that we can actually look it up somewhere? If I want to read up?
Actually, if you go online and you can type in North Carolina General Statutes, and it'll bring you up to the general statute, and like all of the DSS laws are in Chapter 7B. Most of the criminal laws are in Chapter 14. And so you can do like a table of contents on that website, and you can go and look it up there.
Okay. The reason I asked that was one of the things we heard was the parents of the Florida kids. We heard that the parents said they were not aware that they could refuse treatment and walk away from it. So that's why I wanted to know. If parents do want to look it up, they should have a resource.
I have a question about sexual abuse. Very recently, we heard from CMI schools, a minor was charged with the sexual abuse. A mother made a complaint. Another mother made a complaint about an 8-year-old guy. Can kids be charged with sexual abuse?
That's a good question.
Yes, Yes, children can be charged. The way juveniles are charged in certain crimes, it's done as what's called a juvenile arrest. It's most of the time it's in our reporting system. It's just documented in our report. A juvenile court counselor will be assigned to their case. They're the ones that help the family through the court system. Their case is presented, and it'll be determined what kind of I guess corrective action needs to be taken. Like it could be therapy or counseling, different types of things like that. If it's a more serious type of issue, or if the child has an extensive history of committing crimes where it's been, documented, there's a point system. So the juvenile court counselor determines points, and if that case, I guess, gets a certain amount of points, they can issue what's called a secure custody order. A secure custody order is like a warrant, like an arrest warrant, but for a child, and officers will go out, pick up that child, and take them to a juvenile detention facility, which is kind of like a jail for a kid, just different. And then they'll be required to participate in some kind of therapy or whatever the court decides. We don't. It's not often that we get a secure custody order. I mean, it does happen, but it can, depending on the severity of what happens. We don't charge any children under the age of 7 or 6. Under the age of 6, but it can happen depending on what exactly happened.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
You did. Thank you. So, depending on the points accumulated, is there a possibility that the child would be terminated from the school?
I'm not sure as far as that. I don't know what the school does. It could always happen that the child gets transferred to a different school. I know they have schools here in Mecklenburg County more for troubled children that focus on those types of cases. I would imagine that if a child is having those kinds of issues, they would be going to a school like that. They also have different organizations like the Alexandria Youth Network and Thompson, where they have troubled children that go there. It's a much different type of facility that they have different programs to help children with those problems.
I work with children that were charged with sexual abuse. It depends upon how much of a danger they are. So they were able to go to school because school is a place where there's enough supervision and things like that. So it depends, I think, the intensity of the crime. I don't know the law, but I know that, some of my kids are in school.
I have a question about the special education services. I heard you speaking about the related services, say speech therapy, occupational therapy, kind of therapies. Sometimes when the parent feels that the child would grow out of it, or due to insurance reasons, or which is for reasons that are not so very obvious, can the parent withhold from giving a therapy to the child?
As a lawyer, I say this all the time, and you're probably not going to like my answer, but my answer is it depends. And honestly, the social workers, when they get a referral like that says that the child, if the school feels like the child needs, at whatever special educational type services, and the parent is saying, no, I don't want my child to engage in that services, then the social worker will go out and do an assessment, and they'll have to make that determination as to whether or not that child really needs that service. And like I said earlier, parents do have a right to raise their children. But if it's in a situation where it's going to harm that particular child, like that child is not going to be able to sit and learn or be able to be at his or her best, then it may be that that parent may not be making an appropriate decision for that particular child. And if the parent continues to refuse to do that, then it'll be up to the department. You know, we try to work with families and engage them and maybe try to figure out maybe why that parent doesn't want that child to engage in whatever type services. And if the parent is not willing to help provide what's in that child's best interest, then the department really will have to make some decisions as to whether or not we need to step in, ask the court for custody so that we can get the services for the child. Because everything that we do, the focal point is what is in the best interest of the child. And that's all that we do. And we really try to partner with parents because we don't want to take kids out of the home because we know that they do best in the home with their biological family or with people that they know. And so a lot of our services are geared